Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. So today we're going to be looking at something kind of different, something you sent our way. And at first glance, it might seem a little bit niche. We're going to be talking about planner bindings.
Planner binding.
Yeah, planner bindings.
Right now.
Now you might be thinking, planner bindings, really? What's so interesting about how a planner is put together? But as we've been going through the stuff you sent, the articles, and kind of digging deep, we realized that the way a planner is bound.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Like it-
How those pages are held together, it actually has a big impact. It impacts how useful that planner is for you, how long it's going to last, and even the kind of message it sends, about the brand or about you as a person. And so we thought this would be a great way to kind of zoom out and look at these broader ideas about product design, because it's kind of a microcosm of all the decisions that go into making any product that we use.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and what's so interesting about this is even with something like a planner, which is so commonplace, the binding that you choose isn't just some random decision. It's very deliberate, and it has these consequences, like you were saying, for how usable it is, for how long it lasts, and even for the brand's identity, for how people perceive that brand, and even how they perceive you if you're using it.
Right.
So the article that we've been looking at, it's aimed at businesses who are creating planners and selling them.
Yeah.
And they outline 6 key binding methods. But like you said, this is relevant for everyone, even if you're not running a business, because understanding these different approaches can really change how you look at any product. Why does it feel the way it does? Why does it work the way it does?
Exactly. Yeah. And it really gets you thinking about those little design details that you might not usually think about, but that actually make a huge difference in how you experience something.
Absolutely.
So the mission for our deep dive today is to really dig into those 6 binding methods. We've got twin ring binding, spiral binding, sometimes called wire-o binding.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've got center sewn binding, sewing binding, disc binding, and Coptic bound.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But we're going to break it down and we're going to explore what makes each one unique. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? And where does it really shine? What's the best application for each of these methods? And by the time we're done, you should have a much better sense of why a particular binding might be chosen for a specific planner and what that means for you as someone who's going to be using it. So let's jump right in. And I guess the most logical place to start is with twin ring binding, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with twin ring. So as the article details, twin ring binding uses, well, like the name suggests, 2 sets of interlocking metal rings to hold all the pages together.
Yeah.
And what really jumps out to me is this emphasis on being able to easily add and remove pages. That's the big selling point here.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's a really important factor for a lot of people. It speaks to this idea of personalization and customization.
It really does. I mean, the article actually mentions a statistic that really jumped out at me. Apparently, something like 60% of people who use planners, they actually prefer planners that allow for some level of customization.
Wow.
So that's a pretty significant majority. And when you think about it, it makes sense, especially if you have a student planner where you need to, put in specific assignments or maybe take out sections that you've completed, or even for you, like a work planner where you might want to have, dedicated pages for specific projects, or you could even declutter, take out past months. It's really about giving you, a sense of control over that planner.
Yeah. Yeah, that sense of control. I think that's a really key point. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, right? This idea of wanting to customize things, it's part of a bigger trend.
Yeah.
Where people, consumers are increasingly looking for products that can adapt to their individual needs.
Yeah.
Because everyone's different. Everyone's needs change over time. And twin ring binding, it caters to that directly. It offers this flexibility that, some of those more traditional methods that we'll talk about later, they just can't match.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so moving on then, we have spiral binding, which you mentioned is also sometimes called wire-o binding.
Right.
So this one uses a continuous coil made of either plastic or metal, and it runs through those holes that are punched along the edge of the pages.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the big benefits here, and why does it have 2 names? That's always confusing.
Right. So the article really highlights 2 main advantages: cost effectiveness and durability. So from a manufacturing perspective, using that continuous coil, it tends to be a lot cheaper than some of the other methods, which means that the planner can be more affordable for you as a consumer. And as for the two names, it can be a bit confusing, but spiral binding is the more general term. It just refers to any kind of binding that uses that continuous coil.
Okay.
Whereas wire O binding, that specifically refers to a type of spiral binding that uses a double loop wire.
Okay.
So it's a subset.
Got it.
And wire O, it gives a slightly more, I guess, professional, more durable feel than just a simple plastic coil.
Right.
But they're both technically spiral binding.
Okay, that's really helpful to clarify. And the durability thing is interesting too, because the article talks about how spiral bound planners, they can lay totally flat. And that can actually reduce the strain on your wrist and your hand by as much as 30% when you're writing.
That's a lot.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal, especially if you're someone who uses your planner all the time, throughout the day. And it's not just about convenience either, right? It's actually about ergonomics, about, being comfortable and not hurting yourself while you're using your planner.
Absolutely. That functionality is so crucial because at the end of the day, it's about how happy you are with that product.
Yeah.
Right. And being able to lay it flat, that's not just some minor detail. It actually makes it more enjoyable to use, and it makes you more likely to actually use it regularly.
Right, right. And the article also mentions that spiral binding is often a good starting point for new businesses.
Yeah.
Because it's relatively affordable to produce, but it still looks pretty good. It still feels like, a decent quality product.
Right. It gives that impression of quality without, breaking the bank.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to a different type of binding now. Center sewn binding. This one sounds a little bit more traditional, maybe even old school.
It does, yeah.
So what's the main difference here?
So with center sewn binding, the pages are actually stitched together right through the spine.
Okay.
And the main benefits that they highlight are its strength, like it's very structurally sound.
Okay.
And the finish that it gives, like it's often a very elegant, very clean finish. You think about a well-made paperback book
Right.
that's often using center sewn binding.
Okay.
And so it creates a very, very durable planner
Mm-hmm.
that can withstand a lot of use, being tossed around in a bag.
Yeah, yeah. And that idea of elegance seems really important too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because the article suggests that this type of binding, it appeals to, kind of like a more discerning clientele. They specifically mention professionals, creatives, people who really appreciate high quality products and are willing to, pay for that. And there's another statistic here that I thought was interesting. Apparently, 75% of executives, they actually appreciate high-quality planners. And they say that actually translates to increased sales of these center sewn products.
Interesting.
So it's not just about like the look and feel,
Yeah.
It's also about like the perceived value.
Yeah.
Like maybe even like a professional image that it projects.
Absolutely. And when you think about it from a brand perspective, right?
Right.
If a company chooses a center sewn binding for their planner, it's really signaling to the customer, hey, we care about quality and we want this product to last. Yeah. And that can be a big selling point. Makes them stand out from all the other planners out there.
Yeah, yeah. And it makes you think about like what message does the choice of binding send?
Right.
To you, the person who's going to be using it. What does it say about, your values or how you want to be perceived?
Absolutely. It's sending a message whether they intend it or not.
Right. Okay. So next up we have just sewing binding, which the article distinguishes from center sewn. And they say that this is a more traditional method, often hand-stitched.
Okay.
So this sounds even more high-end than center sewn.
It does. It really does. Yeah. They focus here on two main things, and that's durability. But this is like next level durability.
Wow.
And then also this really distinct artisanal touch.
Okay.
So it's not just about how strong it is. It's about the craftsmanship, the skill that goes into creating it.
Right.
And the article says that this type of binding, it really appeals to artists, creatives, people who really value that handmade quality, and the uniqueness that comes with it.
Yeah. And there's a statistic here, too, that 85% of creative professionals, they say that they prefer planners with that handmade quality.
Wow, that's a huge majority.
Yeah. So it's clear that it's not just about, like, holding the pages together. It's about that sensory experience. It's about the story, of how it was made.
It's about that story. It's about the care and attention that goes into making something by hand.
Yeah. And it really elevates the brand, right? Like, it associates the brand with, high quality, meticulous craftsmanship. It's almost like you're getting a piece of, history and tradition.
Absolutely. And again, it's about that message that it's sending, right?
Yep.
It's saying, we're not just churning these out in a factory. This is something special. This is something unique.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's switch gears a bit and talk about disc binding. This one sounds a bit more, I don't know, innovative.
Yeah, it does. It's definitely a more modern approach.
Yeah, and it's described as like a really flexible way to organize a planner.
hmm
So how does it actually work?
So imagine like a series of individual discs. They're often kind of mushroom shaped,
Hmm.
and they run along the spine of the planner. And then the pages have these holes punched in them that correspond to the discs, and you can just snap them on and off.
Oh, okay.
So the main advantage here is that it's so easy to add, remove, and rearrange pages.
Wow.
Like it takes that whole customization thing that we saw with twin ring binding to a whole new level.
Yeah, like it's like ultimate flexibility.
Ultimate flexibility. Exactly.
So who is this? Like who's the target audience for this kind of binding?
Well, the article highlights that it's really appealing to people with, changing planning needs.
Yeah,
People whose schedules are constantly in flux.
makes sense.
So they specifically mention young professionals, people in creative fields. And again, there's a statistic here that 70% of young professionals, they prefer planners that offer this kind of adaptability.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? Like if you're in a fast-paced environment where your priorities are constantly shifting, you need a planner that can keep up with that.
Absolutely. And it also, disc binding, it has this very modern look to it. It's
Hmm.
not just practical, it's also aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah, yeah. It's like it's functional, but it's also stylish.
Exactly.
Okay. So, last but not least, we have Coptic bound Rude Spine. Now that's a name that sticks with you.
It does. It's very memorable.
So what makes this binding method so unique?
Well, the defining feature of Coptic binding is the exposed spine. So the spine of the planner is actually visible, and it has these really intricate, often decorative stitches.
Okay.
And the article emphasizes that this creates a really visually striking and unique aesthetic. It's less about, pure functionality in terms of adding and removing pages.
Hmm.
And it's more about that artistry, that handmade quality.
Okay.
And then the rude spine. That just refers to the fact that the spine is deliberately left exposed.
Oh, okay.
So it's part of the design. It's not hidden away.
I got it. So this is for someone who's really like visually oriented and wants a planner that really makes a statement.
Absolutely. It's for someone who appreciates that artisanal design, that handmade feel. And the article mentions that about 65% of consumers, they're drawn to products that have these characteristics.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a way for a planner to stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, yeah. It's like a statement piece almost.
It is.
Okay, so we've gone through all 6 of these different binding methods now.
We have.
The article then does a kind of comparative analysis, looking at them side by side
What?
in terms of durability, cost, aesthetics, all those factors. So what are like the main takeaways from that comparison?
So when it comes to durability, the article is pretty clear that sewing and center sewn bindings, they're the most robust.
Okay.
So if you need a planner that's going to last a really long time, withstand a lot of use, those are your best bets.
Makes sense.
In terms of cost, spiral, and twin ring, they're generally more economical for manufacturers, especially when you talk about mass production, right? Which means they're usually more affordable for the consumer, but they don't always have that same, high-end feel.
Right, right. And then in terms of looks, aesthetics, it sounds like Coptic and sewing, those are the real standouts there.
They are. They offer that unique handcrafted look.
Yeah. And then of course if customization and flexibility are your top priorities, then disc and twin ring are the clear winners.
Absolutely. And that flexibility, it can really lead to, greater brand loyalty.
Right.
Because if you love your planner, if it works perfectly for you, you're more likely to stick with that brand.
Right, right. It's about that personalized experience. So the article wraps up by talking about, practical considerations for businesses that are making planners. But I think these points are relevant for anyone who's thinking about product design, really.
Yeah.
Whether you're, designing a planner or a phone or a car, it's all about understanding your user, right? So what are like the key lessons here for us as consumers and for anyone who's, involved in bringing a product to market?
Well, the article really stresses the importance of understanding your target audience. What are their needs? What are they
Yeah.
looking for in a planner?
Right.
Are they looking for something that's going to last for years and years? Do they need to be able to rearrange pages constantly? Or are they more focused on, the style, how it looks, that premium feel,
Right.
and the choice of binding, it needs to reflect those
Right.
needs.
And it needs to fit the purpose.
Exactly. So you wouldn't typically see, a disc binding on a planner that's meant to be, like an heirloom quality product that's going to be passed down through generations.
Right, right.
It just wouldn't make sense.
It's got to be the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the article also talks about those more practical considerations of production, the equipment that's needed, the skills that are required for certain binding methods, especially, if you're talking about hand stitching
Yeah.
and how scalable each method is.
Yeah.
Can you easily produce thousands of these? And then finally, it emphasizes making sure that the binding that you choose, it fits with your overall brand, with your product line, so that everything feels cohesive, everything feels like it belongs together.
Right, right. It's all about creating that consistent experience for the customer. So to kind of bring our deep dive into planner bindings to a close, we've talked about twin ring binding with its focus on personalization.
Hmm.
We've talked about spiral binding, which is, cost effective and it lays flat, which is really nice.
Yeah.
A center sewn, which is, very strong, very elegant.
Right?
Sewing, which is, like the ultimate in durability and that artisanal feel.
Hmm.
Disc binding, which is all about flexibility, and Coptic bound, which is just, a beautiful artistic statement. And it's really fascinating to think about how much like thought and engineering and just like careful consideration goes into this one seemingly simple aspect of a physical product.
Yeah. And what's really striking is how this one little design choice, how you're holding those pages together, it can have such a big impact on everything, on how you use the planner, on how long it lasts, on how much
Hmm.
you enjoy using it. And it even affects how much you're willing to pay for it.
It's incredible, and it really gets you thinking about all those little details, in any product that we use, like those little things that we often overlook, but that actually make a huge difference in how we experience that product.
Absolutely.
So as you go about your day today, and you're interacting with all sorts of different bound items, whether it's a notebook or a book or even the packaging of something that you buy, like, will you now look at those things a little bit differently? Will you find yourself paying more attention to, how they're constructed, how they're designed? Because those little details, they matter, and they can really shape our experience.
They really can. It's about becoming more mindful of the things that we use every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for diving deep with us today. We really hope that this has been, informative, maybe even a little bit
It
eye-opening.
has been for me.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.